Hi, welcome back and welcome to stage 3 of the UbD process. So we are really excited to kind of get to the end of this process here. This is your last lecture in this series, and you should really at this point have a kind of clear idea of how stage 1 and 2 work together, and stage 3 is often the easiest part for our teachers because it's something that we do all the time. We are usually most comfortable with the learning activity portion of our job, and so this is usually where I tell my teachers that this is the part that makes the most sense. So if it's been a little bit of a trust exercise or a struggle to get through stage 1 and 2, then I feel really confident that you will have a good time and enjoy stage 3 for sure. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about our roadmap as usual, and here are some of my established goals for us today. One is that I want us to understand how the learning activities change based on the type of learning. And this is a little bit of a thinking exercise because we may have learning activities that we feel work best for certain types of learners in our classroom or that we have seen a lot of success with prior. But it's also important, just as we matched stage 2 assessments to stage 1 learning goals, to also look at those goals and the type of learning that is being asked of students, whether it's factual recall or making inferences or patterns, that we match the activity to what it is that we're asking them to do. And that really leads to a very streamlined approach, and that helps when they get to their assessment to be able to easily transfer that understanding because they have been engaged in activities that mirror the type of learning the assessment is asking them to do. You see a mismatch in this in classrooms where students may be completely engaged in, let's say, in-group work and cooperative learning, which is a great instructional strategy. So they're doing cooperative learning the entire unit. Then they get to the assessment, and the assessment is asking them to do things like explain their answers in writing. They're asking them multiple choice questions. They're asking them about goals that aren't really mirrored in the cooperative learning activity model. So there's a mismatch there, and those students might struggle because of the type of assessment and the learning activity and the mismatch between the two. So that's one goal, is to understand that. Another is to discuss the role of the teacher and the student within a learning plan with the goal of transfer. What kind of role does the student play in this plan? What kind of role does the teacher play in this plan? And we'll look more closely at if that's what's currently going on in the classroom or if there needs to be a shift. And also to identify appropriate learning events for the stage 1 goals and curriculum unit. And we're going to look closely at playing around with some different ideas based on what your stage 1 goals may say. So let's jump right in and revisit our stage 1 goals. So there are 3 types of learning housed in stage 1, and we've got acquisition, meaning making, and transfer. And those are going to dictate the type of teaching that is needed. And you can see I chose 2 pictures just to illustrate the different type of teaching. In one picture, you've got a lot more of a collaborative nature where the students are working together. They're going to need to bounce ideas off each other, help each other make generalizations and test those theories and come back and work together to make a new theory. Versus another type of this other picture is a little bit more illustrative of a direct teaching approach, which has probably direct teaching, some student practice, some feedback, coming back and doing some mini lessons. That's also a very effective type of teaching when you have goals that are more factual and more recall based. So different types of learning for different types of goals. Let's look a little bit more closely at the acquisition, meaning, and transfer goals so that you can really determine in stage 1 what it is you're trying to do. So acquisition goals are facts and skills that are acquired. We see a lot of content goals fall under this category. And when your content goals or when your learning goals for stage 1 are to acquire facts and skills, you would look more closely at a type of learning style that would be lecture, presentation, graphic organizers, modeling. A key benchmark for an acquisition goal is automaticity. So students should be able to recall information. You see this in multiplication tables or perform a skill. When students are learning how to read, we see decoding skills as an acquisition goal. These are very important part of learning in a school setting. Sometimes they get a bad rap because we call them lower level, or because when we're looking at Bloom's taxonomy, they're the levels that aren't necessarily depicted as highest and kind of given some extra value. But our acquisition goals are usually foundational goals in which other types of content and understanding goals lay on top of. So they do play an important role. So if your goal is to acquire facts and skills, look closely at the learning instructional strategies that would match that. The second goal that we're talking about here, the second type of learning, is meaning. And that's making sense of the content and its implications. So in this scenario, if you're asking a learner that you're saying that your learner must make references, test theories, look for connections, these goals are challenged, they're constructed instead of taught and learned. So this is an idea or a theory you might be testing. Some of the instructional strategies you might use are having complex questions and tasks that require the building, testing, and explaining and supporting hypotheses and meanings. You may see some of this when you're trying to make sense of scientific laws and theories, when you're trying to make sense of the content and what its implications are. I also see a lot of this in social studies as well, especially in history, when you have a story, or you have a set of things that happened historically that you want to relay to your students. You want them to learn about a war or a battle or a time in history or a major accomplishment. You want them to learn the content, but really you want them to make sense of it and figure out its implications historically, as well as, relevant to today, what is going on in today. So I see those types of goals there, where your content is being taught, but really your goal is for them to make sense of it and imply what it means today. So those learning strategies look a little bit different. And I think of these strategies as more inquiry-oriented approaches. So an easy way to think about that is lab work, but there's lots of other inquiry-oriented approaches. A Socratic seminar, perhaps discussing a piece of literature in more of a Socratic seminar type of method. And of course, differentiated instruction, I think, falls under this category, but could also fall under all the categories. But I would see that here too, because every student is often on their own goal towards the progress of making inferences about certain areas of certain content. So you would need to differentiate about trying where the student is with understanding the content and the implications, or whether they're still working on the content and they're not ready yet for the implications. So you might need to differentiate instruction there. Our last goal is transfer. This is applying and adapting learning to new situations. So you want to look at your stage 1 goals and say, hey, do I have some strong transfer goals that I need to consider here, and what would I do? When you're looking at your transfer goals, and I'm thinking back to that driving unit that we first talked about earlier in this lecture series, and that some of those transfer goals were to be able to be a safe driver and to make some of the correct decisions in the scenarios. That's a transfer goal, because you want them to apply what they're learning and practicing in driver's ed to the real world on the real street. And the type of strategies you would use are that of multiple coaching opportunities and scaffolding the learning opportunities for students. So I always think about the driver's education in a car, where they've got the wheel on both sides and they've got the brake on both sides, so that theoretically that whoever is teaching the person how to drive could apply the brake and could stop the car. Now, of course, as the driver becomes more confident, whoever is teaching would do that less and less, so that the driver would eventually be completely on their own. And that's really a different role of teaching. That is a little bit more facilitating and coaching. You're training this person, you're watching them, you're giving them feedback, you're modeling for them, but the goal is that you are removing yourself from that situation. And some other types of scenarios, in case you're not teaching driver's ed, that will help you transfer these goals involve a lot of conferencing, a lot of ongoing assessment and reflection. You want students to really be aware of where they're at with transferring their goals and where they're at with learning, with accomplishing, meeting mastery towards certain understanding, and be able to give them feedback, help them, coach them until that is no longer required and they're completely on their own. So look at your stage 1 goals and figure out if they fall into which of these categories, and that will help guide your thinking as to what your learning plan will look at. So your text also gives you another helpful diagram that I pulled a little bit and redefined here, and because they use our action verbs here. And this is something that as educators we're pretty familiar with. When we look at our standards, when we look at our objectives, as far as what role do action verbs play. So this is another tool to help you to understand the acquisition, meaning, and transfer goals. And they can help you plan and teach. So if you've got a lot of acquisition goals, vocabulary words, formulas, Newton's 3 laws, these are the types of verbs you might use when thinking about your learning plan. You're going to have them identify, paraphrase, recall, calculate. If you've got a lot of meaning goals, where you are asking students for the relationship between maybe words and concepts, you're asking them to analyze data and analyze graphs, then you would be using learning plan goals that would look like analyze, compare, critique, interpret, justify, and test. And of course there's multiple other verbs as well. And if you have transfer goals here, you're going to look at words like adapt, adjust, apply, design, innovate, self-assess. Those would be the things that you're going to ask your students to do. So let's say that you were looking at kind of transferring the goal of Newton's 3 laws. Perhaps they were going to design a machine that would illustrate the principles of force. Or if you're looking at vocabulary but you have transfer goals, to use these new words in various speaking and writing situations. And again, with our math example, if you are looking for them, if you have transfer goals based on some of your analysis of data, now they would be developing their own equations. So you can have the same content and have a variety of goals. It's really what you're asking students to do with it. So this is also in your text. There should be some figures in your text as well that you can refer to that have some of these verbs as well. But I wanted to pull a couple so that we could talk about it. So this is also a quote from Wiggins and McTeague as well. It's on page 107 of my version. Yours might be a little bit different. And the quote says, our designs must involve not merely how content will be learned, but how students will learn to think about and use it effectively. And I pulled this little graphic here that made me chuckle and might make you chuckle as well, especially if you're a science person, and I'm a bit of a science person. It says why science teachers should not be given playground duty, and you can see that they are illustrating one of the scientific principles here, and you can guess what the science teacher is maybe trying to make happen. But I think the quote here talks a little bit more deeply about not just figuring out how we are going to teach our content here, but really focusing on how students will learn to think about it and use it. And this speaks to the authentic nature of the tasks that we are using in our classroom and as part of our assessments. How can we model and give our students opportunities to think about the content, to play with the content, and to use it effectively moving forward in their lives? And that's a different lens than I need to teach page 52 on Tuesday. That's one way that we know that a lot of teachers, especially teachers who are using scripted curriculum, are thinking about it. Okay, I finished chapter 2, now I need to teach chapter 3. So the fact that chapter 3 doesn't even have its own content label or its own set of goals, or looking at what they need to wrestle with in terms of acquisition, meaning, and transfer, tells me that we're not thinking about how students are going to learn to think about this and use it effectively. So I'm going to switch a little bit to looking really more directly at a learning plan in stage 3. This is also some of this content is also from your text, but I've put it into a graphic here for us to talk about. And this is what a sample learning plan might look like, because units absolutely can and should have sequences that are familiar, and they're going to take students from the start through an inquiry cycle of theorizing and testing. Now this works really with any goal, but I think it works really well with your meaning and transfer goals as well. It's not as directly aligned to acquisition, although you could certainly use a cycle like this with acquisition goals. It can be simple, it can be complex. So something like this learning plan can address a goal or an essential question of how do I make the color purple? Or how do I understand the measures of central tendency in mathematics? So this learning plan is adaptable to a simple, to a simple or a complex essential question. So let's take this simple one, okay? How do I make the color purple, right? Let's say that is our essential question here. We would introduce the question and the problem, and pose the problem to our students. How do I make the purple, the color purple? I only have a couple of colors, and I'm not sure what to do. So we would move to our students, encourage plausible answers, find out what needs to be known. Well, does anybody know what colors we do have? Well, we have blue, we have yellow, we have red. What else? What don't we know? Well, we don't know what to mix. Or is mixing even a plausible answer? Is mixing the answer? You're going to encourage them to think about that. And eventually developing their own theory. Well, I think maybe we should mix these two colors. Or maybe we don't have the right colors to mix and we need to find new ones. Or maybe mixing is not the answer. Test their theory, refine their ideas, adjust to feedback, see what happens. Oh, we got brown. That's not purple. We're going to need to go back to the drawing board. Refine their ideas, transfer it to new situations. Let's say you're working with paint. How could you do the same thing with crayons that don't mix? Can you transfer that learning to new situations? Can you get your students to see that coloring one color and coloring the color on top of it also might give you the visual effect of purple when you don't just have to mix paint? So you want to transfer that to a new situation. Sidewalk chalk would also be a great application here as well. So this is a cycle that works in various situations. But the point is that the thinking and the manipulation of the content is on the students. The content is being worked with by the students. They are coming up with the answers. And this is the type of learning plan that ensures that students understand. And when we talk about understanding by design, this is what we're talking about. We are designing experiences and learning to ensure that students understand. And this is a great cycle to work from. It might not work for every goal, and that really, hopefully you've heard that message loud and clear. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, modify it. If it doesn't work at all, use something else. This is not a prescriptive plan. This is certainly not something that everybody has to use, but hopefully there are ideas that you can grab onto and experiences that you can mimic and put into your own learning plan that you know will work for your content. So here are some tips for teaching for transfer here. Be explicit with your transfer goals. Think alouds and reminders. And I love this because I have found a lot of success personally with this, especially when you're teaching, let's say, reading, and you're modeling how to be a good reader. Think alouds are very powerful. If you are constantly thinking aloud to mirror for your students how they should be interacting with content, that is a great strategy. So use think alouds and reminders to be explicit with your transfer goals. Think back to that driving education example, since it's something we can most likely all relate to. When you are learning how to drive, there are a number of decisions that are going through the head of an experienced driver that a novice driver might not know. So if the experienced driver can think aloud and model for them all of the various conversations going on and the decisions that need to know, well, I'm coming up to a stop sign, I need to stop. I need to make sure that I look left for traffic that is coming this way because I'm trying to make a right turn. I see that a car is coming, it looks like it's going pretty fast. Perhaps I should apply the brake and we're going to wait until there's a stronger opening. And all of these conversations, when you think aloud, help to teach for transfer. You feel a little silly when you first do it, but it really is worth it in the end. Practice choosing which skill to use often. A lot of times we tell our students what to do and which skill to choose, and we don't give them the opportunity to select it. We select the graphic organizers for them. We pre-select a lot of the items that they should use to solve a particular problem. Even in science, we give students their materials, and we do it because probably it's more efficient. However, to set up a lab and to say to students, what do you need? That's a whole other level in a learning plan. So think about all the decisions we make for our students, and think about if we can have the students practice choosing some of those, practice choosing those skills themselves, because that will give us a lot of indication of how much they know and how much they understand. Provide feedback on self-cueing, knowledge retrieval, self-assessment, and self-adjustment. Not only do we need feedback on their final products, but we need to provide them feedback on the decision-making along the way as well. Change the setup for problems. This is a great one as well. Don't make sure that we're not setting up the problems in the same way. And a lot of that, think back to making all the choices for them. Let's change the way some of these problems look. Have students generalize from increasingly challenging cases. So we like to give students opportunities for success. The research is very clear that that builds self-efficacy in our students and leads them to a higher level of success in a classroom and a higher motivation for learning. So being able to have students have successful challenges, be able to successfully complete these challenges with cases and in situations where the information is a little bit easier, and us as students and us as teachers can increasingly provide more challenging content for them to work with. So think also about that. Think about that in reading as well. This is a practice we do in reading a lot. We have students practice a complex skill on an easier piece to read, and then we increase the reading level of that piece so that they can now apply that skill, whether that's inferencing or whether that's compare and contrast or sequencing on a more challenging text. Math problems, same way. We start with one step, we move towards multi-step. Require students to represent what they know. I think this is really important. Sometimes I think students, they get it right through an initial attempt, and we praise and give them feedback, but to have them go back and reword that means and say it again a different way is also another challenge. It's the same thing as the earlier bullet of changing the setup for problems. We're adjusting the setup for what they know. Okay, so today I want you to think about looking at your learning plan. You're going to build stage 3. You're going to use your working group as well to talk through some of the various opportunities, because this is a lot more open. You can see there's not a lot of little boxes to give you guidance, because the learning plans look different depending on your content and your grade level, and you have some choices to make and decisions about how you want to present them. So in your plan, though, at the end, think through, do you have thought-provoking questions and challenges somewhere in there? It could be your essential questions, and then you could also build in some challenges. So is that somewhere in your plan at the end of this? Do you have opportunities for students to apply generalizations in new situations and consider feedback? That's something that should be a guiding principle. It should be in there somewhere. Do you have experiences that show how knowledge and skills are building blocks and not the end result of learning? And these are things to get you thinking about what could be in your learning plan. And of course, they don't all need to be in there. However, if you have all of these things in your learning plan, you have almost a more guarantee that your students are going to clearly understand and meet your stage 1 goals, because these are really quality aspects of the learning plan portion of a unit. So our last slide here is really about you kind of getting started with your learning plan. And like I mentioned before, you want to complete stage 3 in a way that makes sense for you. I've seen it done a number of ways. I've seen people plop in a calendar for stage 3 and work to fill out what's going to happen on each day of stage 3. I've seen people list day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Remember, this unit plan is for you, is to help you understand. So absolutely figure out a way that it makes sense for you. When I design stage 3, and I design it oftentimes by days, because every school teacher knows that Monday through Friday rarely exists. There's always some kind of interruptions or something else you need to get done, so I work better just in days and can work through my unit that way. So I also will plug in an asterisk where my assessments are going to go as well. So I always make sure that I am including my assessments within my learning plan, because they are so tightly aligned. I also might put in there, this is where I'm going to introduce this essential question or that essential question. I try to make sure that stage 3 includes all of the key aspects that I need to make sure my students are aware of from stage 1 and stage 2. Also, make sure that you are integrating required resources in your learning plan. A plan that isn't really applicable is not really a great product for this type of professional learning. We want you to be able to create something that you can go in and use. So if you know that you have required resources like textbooks, like specific articles people are supposed to read, specific content they're supposed to be working on, specific assessments they're supposed to take in this given time period, integrate that into your plan so that it truly is applicable. And when you're all done, use your working group to check for alignment between all three stages. And again, there are checklists in your text, or by this time, you're probably getting to be fluent enough in your plan and the plan of your working group to start to be able to use some of that checking on your own. I'm trying to scaffold the learning over to you all so that you can start to look at other people's plans and say, hey, I see that you have them doing this great lab and it looks amazing. They're going to really love having this laboratory experience. However, it doesn't really get at some of your goals. It looks fun, but it doesn't get to the core of your stage 1 learning goals. They're getting a lot of fun stuff, but not the content you need. And that, again, you want to be very aware of some of those twin sins we talked about way early on in this lecture series about activity-oriented teaching. The point of stage 3 is to stay focused on getting from stage 1 to stage 2. How do we get students from where our goals are to where our assessments are in a way that is engaging and challenging and thought-provoking and has them really playing with that content. So be wary of the activity-oriented approach, that you're not filling the various activities in here that you think would fit. So I look forward to completed units, and I hope that you've enjoyed this process. I know I've enjoyed talking through it, and hopefully that there are pieces here that you'll be able to take back into your classroom and be able to play with and to reflect on and to refine in future years. Thanks so much for listening, and good luck.